Hey guys, so I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about training for a 14er and what it encompasses. I'm by no means an expert. However, I do have a baseline experience. We're not only going to go over the physical aspects, we're also going to go over the mental aspects as well. So my first tip is to just hike. There are three major variables in a hike. That's going to be 1, the distance, 2, the vertical gain, and 3, the weight you put on your back. So first, distance. A lot of 14ers are going to be between 8 to 14 miles round trip. I would say around 12 is going to be the average. So consider that when making a training plan. Your legs need to be able to go that distance. To some people, it might require starting as a walk around your neighborhood, whether that's a 1 mile walk, a 2 mile, maybe a 3 or 4 mile. As you progress, you're definitely going to want to up that mileage to 8 to 12. I would call that quite moderate. And as you get better at distance and healthier and more physically fit, you can increase to 12 to 20 miles for a day hike, which is phenomenal. The hike I'm doing right now is going up to Mount Rosa, and it's about a 16-mile round trip. So a kind of harder, moderate type hike. So the second variable in a hike is the vertical gain. That is the vertical distance directly up to the sky that you will be traveling over the course of the hike. In this case, the hike is just over 4,000 feet vertical gain. Most 14ers are going to be 4,000 feet vertical gain, with some of the more difficult ones being 6,000 to 8,000 feet. So that's why vertical gain is a variable that you want to be familiar with and you want to take into account when training for a 14er. I honestly measure my progress each week, not only by mileage, but by vertical gain. If you track the vertical gain you achieve each week, you're definitely going to be more cognizant of that aspect and that variable. And when planning hikes, that's going to be a key component you're going to want to consider. When it comes to training for a 14er, vertical gain, in my opinion, is one of the most important elements and metrics to measure, to see where your fitness is and to see how you can get better and more efficient at climbing vertical distance. For some people, you might want to start off at maybe 100 to 200 feet of vertical gain per run or walk or hike, and work your way up to maybe 1,000, 2,000, 4,000. If you want to really push yourself, go ahead, get 8,000 in a day. That's phenomenal. As you track your vertical feet in your workouts, you're going to notice your vertical feet per hour improves the more that you incorporate vert in your workouts. That's just a key element in climbing a mountain, because it's the vertical element that's challenging, not so much the distance. And the last element in a hike is going to be how much weight do you have on your back. On winter 14ers, you can expect to carry anywhere from 40 to 50 pounds on your back, depending if you're going to camp. During summer, it could be as low as 10 pounds on your back and upwards of 30 pounds if you're hauling around 12 pounds of camera equipment like I am. So if you're like me and like to suffer unnecessarily up a summer 14er and carry 30 pounds on your back, then make sure you train with 30 pounds on your back. My pack right now is about 28 pounds, almost all of it water. And the nice thing about carrying water is you can carry the weight on the ascent, and on the descent you can dump most of the water. So that will help your knees in your training program. Not to mention you're a pack mule that can assist other hikers who didn't bring enough water. So just get out there and do some nice long hikes with some vertical gain and a pack on your back. And that is a fail-proof way to prepare for 14ers. My second tip is heart rate training. And what that is you train, whether that's hiking, running, swimming, bicycling, any physical activity, your heart will be in a specific zone, zone 1 through 5. Zone 1 is going to be extremely low heart rate, where you're going for a casual walk, right? Zone 2 is now you're exerting yourself a little more, but not to the point where you feel tired or completely exhausted. And it is the sweet spot for going a long distance. You should be able to maintain a zone 2 for hours on end. Zone 3 is when you start picking up the pace and you start breathing a little harder. Right now as I speak, I'm probably on low zone 3, so I do need to slow down. Zone 4 is probably what most people think that you need to train when you go for a run or a hike. And that's when you're just huffing and puffing. And that is way too hard. You're not being as efficient as you could be when training for an endurance event like climbing a 14er. Zone 5 is completely anaerobic. You basically can't hold that activity for more than a minute on the high end. And that's going to be basically sprints, hill sprints, etc. When it comes to long endurance events like hiking a 14er, the most useful zone is going to be your zone 2. And that is your aerobic zone. So the bulk of your training should be in zone 2. And let me tell you, zone 2 is painfully slow. I often have to stop just to lower my heart rate to get back to zone 2. And the way I track my heart rate is with a heart rate chest strap, a monitor. Now, while my watch monitors my heart rate, it's not always accurate. So I suggest investing in a $25 to $50 heart rate monitor strap to monitor that while you train. And everyone's zone 2 is going to be different. My zone 2 is going to be between 120 to 135 beats per minute for my heart rate, which is basically a conversational pace. It's a pace where you can exercise and have a conversation with someone else. So that's a key, easy way to know if you're in zone 2. If you want to look more into heart rate training, specifically for mountaineering or alpinism, ice climbing, anything, I highly recommend looking into Steve House's book, Training for the New Alpinism. He goes in depth with the science behind training for mountaineering. In Steve House's book, he recommends up to 6 months of strictly zone 2 training to build what we call the aerobic base. And the aerobic base is what allows you to keep on moving at a high rate of speed for hours on end. Over weeks and months of training your aerobic base, which is trained through zone 2 training, you'll start to notice that before, when say you can do 1 mile in 15 minutes at 130 beats per minute, 6 months later, you may be able to do 12-minute miles at 130 beats per minute, which is extremely beneficial to keeping a fast pace while going the distance and being able to continue moving and not hitting a major wall where you can't go any further. After the 6 months of strictly zone 2 training to maximize that aerobic threshold, that's when he recommends you start doing more specificity training. So if it's an ice climb, you're definitely gonna want to start working your forearms, your upper body, and whatnot. And you're also going to want to start including some anaerobic, because there are periods of time where anaerobic can be useful, such as getting up a class 5 rock face potentially. And there are times where you might fall over and you need to stand up with a 50-pound pack, and that's when strength training is going to be important. So after you have that huge aerobic base down, ideally you're going to move and start incorporating some strength training and anaerobic training. To maintain a zone 2 heart rate, you're going to have to probably stop and walk, if you're doing a run on hilly terrain, quite often, unless you already have a big aerobic base. So don't feel discouraged. I'll typically try and do a 5-mile trail run in the mornings with about 800 to 1,000 feet of vertical gain, and I can't tell you how much I'm stopping to walk uphill in order to maintain my zone 2 heart rate. So that's completely normal, and you should expect that, which actually makes the activity a little more enjoyable, and it makes it where it's so bearable that you can do it multiple times a week. Which leads us to our third tip, and that's your weekly mileage. Not only your weekly mileage, but your weekly vertical gain. A large factor in achieving a huge aerobic base is going to be how many miles do you run or hike a week? More specifically, how many miles a week do you train in zone 2? To start, maybe you might want to run or hike 5 miles in a week, right? That's going to be 1 mile for 5 different days of the week. To some people, you might want to do 20 miles in a week, which is pretty solid. That's always a pretty good milestone when you're consistent enough to run or hike in zone 2 for 20 miles per week. Right now I'm logging around 35 miles a week. I'm definitely still in the training phase for my aerobic base, and I'm still building it. So I'd like to get that weekly mileage a little higher, but by keeping that consistency, which is key, my aerobic base is getting better, and it becomes easier and easier to maintain a faster pace for a longer period of time. A lot of people will follow the 10% rule, which is you can only increase your mileage week by week 10% more than the previous week. So if you did 10 miles last week, 10% of 10 miles is 1 mile. You can only add on 1 additional mile the following week. Or if it were 20 miles, you can do 22 miles the following week. Now, I wouldn't call that a steadfast rule that you have to follow. We're all different. However, it is a pretty good, safe way to build up that weekly mileage without getting an overtraining injury, which is one of the reasons we train in Zone 2. Zone 2 is easier on the body, and you will be able to recover more efficiently than if you were doing anaerobic training, which could require days to recover, which means unless you want to overtrain an injury, you have to lay back on the Zone 2 training, which ultimately will decrease your weekly mileage and hurt your aerobic base. So to basically summarize, achieving a high aerobic base, which is the end goal in 14er training or any long endurance event training, you need to consider high duration, high frequency, and the proper intensity. So you want to maximize your weekly duration as well as the frequency while maintaining that lower intensity in Zone 2. That is how you train specifically your aerobic base. My fourth tip is know the equipment that you need. And not only know the equipment that you need, know what not to bring. Because weight on your back is what will slow you down. To know what equipment you need to know what conditions you expect to face, as well as the distance and vertical gain of the hike to the summit. So if you plan on rain, make sure you bring a rain jacket. If you plan on encountering some ice, maybe it's wise to bring some micro spikes, some traction. If it's the middle of winter, you might need some snowshoes, you might need an ice axe, crampons, and multiple layers. So be realistic with yourself and what you actually need, and leave behind the non-essentials, especially when you start 14ers and you're trying to gauge your fitness and how well and efficient you can climb or hike them. Now, my final tip, and in my opinion, the most important tip, is embracing the discomfort. You are going to be uncomfortable a lot. You're going to experience cold, wind, hail, heat, extreme muscle fatigue. It's going to be very uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable in training, and it's going to be uncomfortable on the mountain. It's going to be very uncomfortable when you're huffing and puffing at 13,000 feet trying to catch your breath, but you can't because of that altitude. It's going to be very uncomfortable. You need to be at peace with that. Not only do you need to be at peace with that, you need to embrace it. And not only embrace it, you need to pursue it. You need to pursue it in your training. That is one of the most important things. You're going to tell yourself, I could stop now. I've gone far enough. Why do I need to keep going? I've done a good effort today. No, you need to go to the top. You can do a lot more than what you think. Your mind is one of the most important tools you have when it comes to ascending a 14er. Ideally, you simulate worse conditions and more discomfort in your training, because your training should be in a more controlled environment than on an isolated mountain with no cell service. I've done 25 miles over the past 2.5 days with around 6,000 feet of vertical gain, I'm definitely hurting right now. And I know I've got 2,000 more feet to go up. A way that helps me cope is visualization. I visualize myself on a summit. I go back to the countless times I've hit a summit and the amazing feeling of satisfaction that I achieve. I go back to those memories. I visualize them, I feel them. In training, I think about the end state. I think about the big goals I have. Whether that's Rainier, Denali, maybe some of the larger 8,000 meter peaks. I think about those. And I visualize myself on an expedition. And I also know what it takes to actually get there. And I know and accept and embrace the discomfort it's going to take. So once you accept the fact that 14ers are going to be difficult, they will not be a cakewalk, you will experience a lot of discomfort. Once you come to terms with that, it's going to be a lot easier to tackle a 14er or tackle 30 in a season. Here we are on the summit of Mount Rosa. So I hope this video helps you guys with expectation management as well as preparing for hiking a 14er. Most of you probably are physically capable of doing something like Bierstadt right now or Quandary, right? But if you're looking to see, okay, how can I train for Snowmass, which is going to be 20 plus miles, or the Crestone Traverse, which is going to be 15, 16 miles, then these are some of the elements that you really do need to think about and take seriously. If this video was useful, go ahead, leave a like. If you didn't get much out of this video, go ahead, leave some feedback in the comments below. Let me know how I can improve. So thanks guys for watching. Really hope you got something out of this. Train on.